fact that any time a decision that is weighing on anyone is released, in that the control of that decision is released, there is a sense of levity, or a sense of lightness that enters the scene. And I think that has a lot to do with the whole aspect of allowing. So you give the reins over to the universe instead of trying to hold the reins yourself.
And demand.
Yeah.
It turns out. I was talking, so this is Jim Hamilton and Keita Szpak. Close enough?
Close enough.
Szpak?
That's good. That works better.
All right. Keita is an author, happiness expert, a speaker, and a publicist. And she works with people for personal and professional excellence, kind of like me.
We are kindred spirits.
Peas in a pod.
There you go.
So what we were talking before we started this call, and the idea is about the part that letting go plays in our reality creating, especially around business, especially around something that's important to us, something that we're driven to do. And while we have all the earmarks of success, there comes a point where there comes a significant difficulty. And while we've been driven to drive this project, we do have to learn how to let go. What do you say? They say, let go and let God. And what we're actually talking about is the peace that shows up when we let go. I was talking with a client today. We were talking about the part that expectations play in our choices and decisions, and how we want to learn how to roll with that. And while she's at a very different place than where you and I are talking from, we still all have that same experience of holding on to what we have in mind, or letting go, finding that partnership with the cosmos, with innate intelligence, and letting something bigger occur, even if it seems to be at odds with our expectations. Isn't that kind of what we're talking about?
Yeah, it is. It's an interesting dynamic, isn't it, Jim? Because when there is something important that you want to accomplish, then there becomes that not only an expectation, but there's that need to accomplish, that need to complete, that need to reach the end. And whether that is indicative of our logical thinking, or it could be indicative of the way we have been schooled to finish something, and to finish it in a logical fashion and in a linear fashion. That in and of itself is actually antithetical to the whole business of allowing the universe to work with us. Because our sense of planning, or our sense of end or completion, maybe, and generally sometimes, is entirely different than what the universe or the divine has in mind.
Well, at the very least, we have a limited perspective of the outcome, where the universe has a much bigger perspective. And ultimately what we want to do is, while we want what we want, we've all learned that when we want it in alignment with the universe unfolding, is much better, which means letting go.
Yeah, and I think where the assurance, at least from my perspective, comes in, where the trust comes in, is if the project, the event, the initiative, the presentation, whatever it is you're working on, is based on a good intention, is based on goodness, is based on helping, is based on making things better for somebody else, or for a group, making it better for a group, then that goodness in and of itself has to assure you that if your way is not working out, then whatever way is identified by the unseen, by the universe, will in fact work out due to the nature of goodness that is embedded at the outset of whatever endeavor you're undertaking. That to me it's a wonderful trust connection.
So in a way, it's kind of the way, I won't say the way I describe it, but to add to that, when I put ideas out or generate things that I want to do, or goals or assertions, or I look to see if the universe fills the sails on the project. In other words, as a human, the idea comes to me, and it's up to me to flesh it out. If, of course, if it feels right, in other words, it's something that interests me, and then ultimately to see if the universe supports it or not. Because we're now getting into efficiency, we're now getting into where instead of simply trying to drive the project with the mind version and all of that limitations, we're, one of the things I think about spirituality that's interesting as far as the world of 9 to 5 is as we discover the concepts that we're talking about, efficiency becomes greater, it takes less effort to accomplish the same thing, and of course the rewards are equal or even greater because not only is there the financial return of a project done well that the universe supports, but there's a glow and an excitement of achieving something for which the universe was an active participant because you knew how to let the universe contribute. And as we have that internal appreciation, that internal gratitude, that internal ease, takes our life into a simpler direction. And frankly, as we learn how to do that, law of attraction generates more of the same thing, and we learn how to feel the feel, or as they would say, feel the burn. But we're feeling the cosmos here, and we can create concepts and ideas and business projects, and doing them on our own has a certain limitation, even if they're good. Ultimately, we want that partnership with the cosmos because it's our very nature, and as we let go of what doesn't work and allow the universe to become a bigger participant, we can feel it. And I think that's where we were talking before we actually fired up the camera. Is that gratitude and whatever else?
Yeah, there's a sense of certainly of appreciation that comes of that surrendering, because you realize you don't have to do it all yourself. That's the point. The other aspect or concept that's coming to mind right now, Jim, is the fact that in this area of thinking, in this area of releasing, there is also the concept of capacity, the capacity to hold, the capacity to hold space. In our busyness and hurriedness of trying to accomplish, sometimes we don't allow the moments to just sit. Where in those moments of quiet or silence, we actually do get the intuitive hits that we do need and aspire to fully capitalize on how the universe is helping us. And so that the capacity to hold more than our intellect, to me, is very important, because our ability to hold intellect in addition to that, or whatever our intuition is telling us, whatever our feelings are telling us, whatever our heart is telling us, all that makes for an enormous human capacity. We've been told that our brain only operates, or we're only using X part of our brain. In one way, we should turn that around and say we're only using X percent of our hearts or of our souls, because actually I think we're trying too hard to utilize the brain. And in fact, that's not where the capacity, that's not where the output really is. The output is really in the heart and in the soul.
So that's a really good point. It's a good demonstration of the difference between the mind, driving things by the mind, which has huge limitations, and I personally see the heart as more, as a center, as more symbolic, because I say the nervous system is the actual center. But even at that, there's a very distinct distinction between the heart and the mind running the show. And as we come to let go of the mind and plug more into the heart, which I don't think that's the best way to say that, I think that efficiency, that's the real limitation in that. What we really want is we want love in our life. We want love in all of our expressions. We want love in all of our relationships, whether they be with things that we're manufacturing in our head as ideas. We want that relationship to be based on love, and the mind is really not that tool. It doesn't have the dimension to go there, therefore the concept of the heart. And I think it's a great analogy.
Yeah. I'm sure you've heard, and those who are listening have heard of Greg Braden, who initially was set out to debunk the whole aspect of the unseen and the divine, and he's a scientist by training, and ended up going on a search where he has married scientific fact and principles with what he calls the heart energy, or the energy that does exist, that is unseen. And his alignment of head and heart is really quite amazing. So that we can say here, if we go back to that whole aspect of capacity, capacity is not just heart or just brain or just one thing. It is a holistic container that allows us as humans to bring in all these elements and to be respectful of them all. But if we go further with that, we would say, and I would say, that the soul, the heart, is the driver. It is the driver, but it welcomes other aspects of our humanness to be part of that driving.
Well, certainly the mind is not the solution. We can certainly see that. The mind doesn't drive. Oh, Lordy. So this holistic approach to life is beyond the scope of the mind.
Correct.
There's a world that, a forest or trees would tell you the mind is a waste of time, and they kind of, a forest feeds off the sun, it feeds off the earth, it's an intermediary between the earth and the sky, it plays its part, it contributes, and that meshing with the bigger whole is what we're all interested in becoming. Certainly I am. I assume, to me it's a good way to describe it. There's a bigger game than simply being on our own, for which we don't seem to do such a hot job. And
Yeah.
the idea of opening up to this bigger picture where everything is in unison isn't a good word, but where everything is holistic, where everything meshes with everything else and there is no resistance, and the overall picture goes forward, and becoming part of that. I think we assume we lose when we give up what we are, but actually we end up taking on, we become more. It's a different expression. It doesn't cost anything. And I like to say we get the ride of our life, but even more than that, we learn how to express in an all-new manner, for which the I'll say the grace, the satisfaction and the appreciation and the gratitude, the grace becomes greater, and we move to a new way of operating.
Yeah. My favorite expression of mine is playing in the field of grace. Uh, and of course, that's what certainly we aspire to. But it is interesting that in order to get to that aspect of playing in the field of grace, there has to be a process or a progression. And so, if you want to talk about the mind as a means to an end, in other words, the mind figures in us initially for us to then outgrow it or evolve out of it into that field of grace. That's why I don't um, disparage the mind as much as I think of it as something that we're evolving out of. It was or is a necessary step to our being able to think out where we're going. And once we have that sense of the whole, then the mind is it's as if we molt, we lose that skin, and we become the butterfly. We've been the caterpillar, and then we've been in this cocoon. That cocoon may be, in fact, us in our mind, thinking the mind is all, when in fact it is simply a means to an end.
I was thinking, you don't need the eggshell after you hatch, do you?
Sometimes you need to eat it, as some creatures do, and in our own way, the mind is a form of, I think it's a form of a resource that we outgrow eventually. So it is part and parcel of our evolution, but certainly it is not meant to be with us or to be our master or for us to be within our minds as we grow and as we evolve.
Well, I, of course, explain that a tiny bit differently. Um, it sounds to me like what you're saying is in our evolutionary path, we go and grow through a stage of where we become maybe minimally conscious, which is what the mind is about, and then we let it go and go on.
Yeah,
Um,
that's what I would say. It's a similar to even the evolution physically of the brain. You begin with a reptilian, and then you move on to one that brings in a form of emotion, and then you develop your frontal lobe, which gives you uh, a greater sense of judgment, a greater sense of the more sophisticated emotions of compassion, and even and that kind of thing. And again, to me, that is all part of man's, of humans' history as they move through to enlightenment, as they move to ascension. And it could be that history is cyclical. Remember, we spoke about this, I would say, a few months ago about the whole idea that when we're gone, as in you are gone or I am gone, that things continue. And do we actually come back in some other shape or form, or are we completely discarded in favor of another type of human? does that cycle in fact repeat itself?
Well, that's the common story. That's the concept of reincarnation.
In other words, if our soul comes back, I would like to think that if we have come to some point in this existence, being who we are, that we would be given grace to sort of start where we've left off, as opposed to going right back to square one and beginning the whole process yet again.
Well, I haven't seen much evidence for an accumulation of knowledge and wisdom from preceding lifetimes showing up. I haven't seen any evidence for that at all, personally. I mean, I really haven't.
Yeah.
We're dumber than we ever have been as a species, in my opinion. We're farther away. I mean, there's individuals that are striving for more, and the whole species moves in that direction, but the idea that we collect wisdom and knowledge and express it in our next lifetime, I don't see much evidence for that.
The only way that I might see it is if one talks about blessed mothers and fathers or ascended masters, so that there is an ascension, a personal ascension that goes on in the soul. And as the soul acquires the wisdom and the understanding and the grace, it then is gifted with a position, whether that position is in the so-called hierarchy of heavens or what the case is. That has certainly been posited. But of course, then you can bring in the whole notion of karma, and karma then can completely sort of remove that whole image and put your soul back in a very regressive state, or in a regressive existence next time round. So it's a very interesting discussion philosophically, very, very complex in terms of how and when if we choose or are coming back, how we come back.
It's interesting, in all the conversations we've had, we've never talked like this. I personally don't believe in reincarnation at all. I think the species moves forward. I think there's an assumption of our own self-importance, which I don't think has proven itself, but I'm really more of the line of thinking that we come here, we contribute, we go back. I don't believe in a soul that is actively learning and actively growing. I think that the whole species might have a soul. The whole species evolves. I don't see any. That's an interesting conversation.
But I was going to say, it may be that we are spiritual in this form, and maybe that our souls end up being together. In other words, there is a connectivity that is formed in some other dimension, in some other existence that is not human-like, but in one way does permit whatever you have accumulated in terms of your sense of your essence, because energy, as far as physics is concerned, does not die. So if we take a look at ourselves as energetic beings, or of energy, then where does this energy dissipate to? How is it? Does it continue?
I don't think that's true. I'll give you an example. You have a project that you've been working on that may come to nothing. That energy will dissipate and be gone. The idea that it keeps going isn't true at all. I don't believe. I mean, that's an assumption that energy keeps going. I think that actually the second law of thermo whatever
But
is,
isn't it Einstein who predicated the fact that energy is not something that can be removed or end once it is. For instance, if I release to you a set of words that are hurtful, then the energy of those words, the conversation will end and terminate. But the energy of those words, the ripple effect of those words, whether they're within you or whether they are within this environment that I'm in, I think resonate. I think there is a sense of a state where these forms of exchange, and I will use the ripple effect, that they, without us being here ever again, have now an existence, have now a part to play in the universe as it unfolds and expands. Why is it expanding? What is provoking, or what is the element that is driving that expansion? Is it not energy?
well, energy being created and the mind of man having thoughts. I'm not sure that's the same thing at all.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big assumption that if energy cannot be destroyed, we're talking at a very different level than what the mind produces. I don't think that's the same thing.
Yeah.
The idea that you have some hateful thoughts and that they're there forever, that's a pretty serious deal. I think.
In other words, from what I hear and research, the effect that each of us has on one another and on our environment is profound. And it may be that I've taken it to an extreme. Let's say it is not everlasting or forever, but there is a state of being, a state of occupying space that the energy of our words and actions and thoughts does occupy.
So let me give you an example to illustrate, I think, what we're talking about.
Okay.
If somebody says something really nasty to someone else, and that person is resistant to that and says something back, now you've created a dynamic. That's really what it is a dynamic. And as long as those two people want to fight and disagree, it will go on. Whether it will continue to go on through immortality, go on forever, I don't know. But what I would suggest is that one person who says something really nasty to another, and that second person, instead of resists, loves, that thing is dissipated right then and there.
Yeah.
It's not continued by the second party. And I don't believe it continues to be real. What keeps it real is the humans in their naivete and their misunderstanding how things work. Because in resistance, this stuff bounces off of each other. And I think when resistance fades, it fades. I think that you would find the bigger world of energy is made of love, and I don't think you're going to find all this stuff running around and bouncing off. I really don't.
But that's the point, Jim. If we're talking about being loving to one another and speaking with
what to one another?
being loving to one another, isn't that the point? Because then you have a state of love. You have a state of harmony. And you have a state of a coming together of what is human and of what is the universe. The other aspect to this is whether we are using positive or negative thoughts or words, are part of the universe, and the universe is part of us. And so I guess what I'm trying to illustrate is that the repercussion that we have of what we say or what we do is profound. Maybe it's not as dramatic as what I've said at first, but the fact of the matter is, if we can have love be, because the universe is love, then by the same token, we could also have hate, if in fact hate is what is the state of emotion or what is being exchanged.
We're going to end up in quite a conversation here.
But I agree with you that if you were going to say something, Kia, you sound like a frog, and I took it personally. And I said, well, I'm not talking with you anymore. We're not even going to talk. In other words, that negative exchange, it's left. It is atmospheric. It has an effect on where you are and where I am. However, if you say, oh, you sound like a frog, and I say, I've always wanted to have a nice deep voice. In other words, I turn it into, and it becomes an aspect of gentleness or love, then that stays a part of what is our state. And what I've found in most of my readings and research this year is the profound effect that we have on one another without knowing it. And so maybe I am using hyperbole here in the course of the conversation, but I cannot underestimate the power that one human being has on another, even if no word was said.
Well, I go back to the example, is speaking of the power that a human has over another. When they partner with innate intelligence, in other words, you move to love, your influence is far more powerful and far more influential than if you come from hate. I mean, in other words, even coming from hate, the other person's got to respond or it doesn't even count. In other words, they have to, in other words, I said, man, you sound like a frog, blah, 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 and you reacted to it. Now we've got something going. If I say you sound like a frog and you say, I love you, Jim, the hate has no, it doesn't, or whatever the remark was, has no grounds. It has no, it takes a human to bounce it back to turn it into real, in other words. I don't think it's real when somebody just says it out there. If you don't react to it, it isn't real, in my opinion.
But the fact of the matter is, I agree with you to a certain extent, but what I'm saying as well is the person who says the remark has repercussion because of that remark. I don't think so. So from that point of view, I think there is something in play. Because yes, you're correct. If you're not going to engage me, or I'm not going to engage you, then that conversation or the remark is dead in the water, as it were. However, the speaker, the actor of said words or said actions, unconsciously has already taken those words or action in themselves, even if they feel they're the victor. That's the whole aspect of the human condition, in a way, isn't it? Thinking that if you bawl somebody out or get angry with someone, you're going to win, or you're going to be the victor. When in fact, this whole aspect of loving and allowing and not resisting deals with that aspect of not being a victim. You're not a victor. You are just being.
Well, so an unhappy person who spits unhappy remarks, the question is, do they extend that, and does it extend? And it depends on the human on the other end, because I don't think that just being really unhappy extends very far into the universe. And I think when they quit being unhappy, that I think it dissipates. At the same time, somebody that's unhappy tries to interface with somebody else and create more unhappiness. Okay, that can grow if the person reacts. If the person loves, that person, the angry person, may go find somebody else to pick a fight with if they can't fight with the person that they want to fight with. I think it's a pretty limited deal.
Well, if we talk about the limited deal, then if we look at Hawking's levels of consciousness, right?
Right.
If we look at those, and we look at the effects they have, and I do agree that the higher levels of consciousness have a much more powerful effect.
Right.
Right. But I guess what I'm trying to point out is even a base level of behavior or action or thought does also have an effect. And the whole point is if you have enough of this baseness of action, of a negative action, it has an effect on the world, just as a whole group of those in a loving state have a profound effect on the world.
So I agree with that, and what I'm trying to suggest is that if somebody is nasty and somebody reacts, it keeps it going.
Correct.
You've got this base level of people, and right now the planet's full of it, and it's actually how people are learning. They're stepping out of this dialogue, this resistance. I mean, you've got the I don't know the abbreviation or the acronym, LGB, I don't know what the bathrooms and this and that, and people are resistant to it, and it keeps us stirred up. But once they quit resisting it, the problem goes away. The problem is maintained. That base resentment, that base whatever, is only maintained by parties that resist it. When you move into love, it goes away.
No, I agree. We're essentially saying the same thing. Although, as I said earlier on, I was just examining the notion of energy, and the fact that from what I have read and studied, that energy cannot be destroyed. So if you talk about any form of an energetic, of any kind of an energetic being that is behaving, talking, whatever, then there is an aspect that creates a residue. And perhaps it is that residue that isn't quite defined. It's something that we don't entirely understand or know about in terms of whether it crests on a wave or it's a form of the tiniest particle in the universe, makes up black holes, whatever, we don't know.
Well, the energy of the sun and the energy of a human being are not the same thing. I mean, you can say they're the same, but I'm not sure they are, because let's say you take a flashlight in the dark and you shine it. In other words, if human beings were coherent, their ability to express and their ability for their energy to extend would be much greater. But let's say a human being is like a cheap 12-volt flashlight, and that beam dissipates very rapidly. It doesn't shine very far. It's energy, but it doesn't shine very far because it's not coherent at its base. You take a laser, which is coherent light, and that light shines much, much, much farther. And what I'm trying to suggest is that human beings are an extremely, I'd say, incoherent species. I mean, there's nothing impressive about us. Now, it's true, the potential is really incredible. And yes, individuals are expressing, and I think it's the individuals that come out of this pool of, like a pond, like frogs, tadpoles coming out and becoming frogs, that I think on our own, I don't think we're powerful at all. I really don't. I think dysfunction is the name of the game. I think resistance is the name of the game, and it's climbing out of that where our potential is expressed. And as we move farther and farther away from resistance and being incoherent, we start to have some strengths to the point where eventually ascension becomes available. That's really coherent. That's a really coherent nervous system. It's a really coherent partnership with your surroundings. And I think humans milling about on this planet, and all the ones that are for Trump and all the ones that are against Trump and all that, that polarity, I don't think there's much. It makes a lot of noise, but I don't think it's very coherent. It's not a very nice way to explain it, but we're not much beyond animals. You get right down to it. We fight with each other. We're bombing hospitals. There's a lot of dumb stuff going on, and I would like to think that it doesn't extend very far out into the universe, personally. It does make a lot of noise.
Yeah, the whole point of our being here is to rise above this, and those who have ascended or have had a sense of immense resonance and peace and grace, they have emitted immense light, and they have emitted immense light, and they have, by virtue of that, and it's been documented, that light, that energy, amazingly attracted people to themselves and been able to convey and be able to teach and instruct others on how to be that kind of light. So it's interesting. We do have a ways to go. You are correct, but at least I'd like to think we're going in the right direction.
I wrote an article. It was called Caterpillars and Frogs, or Caterpillars and Butterflies and Tadpoles and Frogs. And the question was, when a tadpole becomes a frog and climbs out of the pond, does it look back? And I think the answer is no. Because you become something else, and you go and you become a match for what you're becoming for, and what is no longer a match is no longer of interest. And I wonder if this planet, in all of its polarity and duality, is nothing but a pond for humans at their own rate and speed to find each other and become more. And in the meantime, it's just kind of a pond, and it's all all the potential is there, but it's the ability to grab the brass ring. It's the ability to grab that expression and become more, for which I say partnering with innate intelligence is how you achieve that. You can't do it on your own. I don't believe you can do it on your own at all. And that, again, becomes the shortcoming of the mind.
No, I don't think either one of us have ever said that you can do this on your own. No, I don't think that we've ever spelled that out that way, Jim. I think in our endeavor to become good, whole human beings, we do that with the support of the divine and the universe, not exclusively. That's what our whole modus operandi here is, in terms of understanding and appreciating the supports that we do have in the universe that are helping us to be better people, to be who we are supposed to be in terms of becoming. Right?
Well, so my world says that the less resistant we are, the more whole we become. We start meshing with something that's real, and in resistance, we don't have access to it. We're dysfunctional and incoherent.
Yeah, exactly.
it's kind of fun to explore this idea. There's not a right to it, but I think for people listening, or even ourselves, you and I listening to our conversation, we discern and we learn. I think the more we let go of the mind, the better off we are. But we have to learn how to do so. Use the mind to get to the point of being able to let go. You have to have command of the mind, or at least understand it, to use it, to jettison it, to leave it behind, because truly you do leave it behind at some point.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we were both initially speaking about. So we've sort of come full circle. Very nice. I'm going to have to beg off soon because my throat is starting to get a little sore. Any last words?
What was the very last of that?
I said, any last words or comments?
Well, I think appreciation and gratitude, and the ability to discern to our heart's content till we don't have to anymore.
Yeah, it's like practicing until you can go to automatic pilot, and you throw away all the practicing, and you just that's a pretty neat. It's a pretty neat thing to be.
So we're going to go find you a toadstool that you can go get under and get some snoozing, get some. I mean, that'd be a frog would do that. Never mind.
A frog's gonna get on a lily pad, and the frog's gonna just get the sun on its back.
So what's your weather doing up there?
It's fortunately it was sunny today and warmish, but it's cooling down and raining. And we're supposed to be picking up some double-digit pluses later on the week, which I'm looking forward to, because we've actually had cool weather. It has not been. I think I've only been insured maybe once.
Wow.
And it's already May, so that's unusual.
Well, I've run my air conditioning in my car some. But right now it's kind of cool. The weather's staying moderate here.
Yeah.
Which is nice. The longer it'll stay like that, the better.
But the sun, when it's on my back, it's very, very nice. It's already warm, so that's good. So
right.
That's it for today.
So thank you for being here.
No, thank you too. It was a good conversation.
You're a beautiful lady. I enjoy our communication and our searching for ideas and thoughts and sharing them. And
yeah, I might, if I have time, I might go into a little more exploration of energy and how it persists or how it exists. Yeah.
To be continued.
To be continued. Yeah. Have a good rest of the day.
All right. Thank you. All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.